She had one job, to hold on to her own baby, and once again, she couldn't do it. If you thought last week's episode of Inimba was heavy, wait until you hear what happened last night, because Zethu just lost custody of her child again, and honestly, Mina, I don't even know who to feel sorry for anymore. Stay with me till the end because this one has layers: postpartum depression, a sister who is tired of carrying everyone, a husband who has quietly checked out, and a completely separate crisis brewing in Zolika and Lazarus's marriage that might just be the real headline of the night. Let's get into it. So the episode picks up right where things left off, with the family still trying to figure out what to do about Zethu and the baby. And listen, I need to say this upfront, Zethu is not a villain in this story, but she is also not making it easy for anyone around her to help her. That's the tension the whole episode is built on. She is clearly struggling. Anyone watching can see that this is a woman who is not okay, who gave birth and has since been drowning quietly while everyone around her tries to throw her a rope she keeps refusing to grab. And that refusal is what's driving KODWA up the wall. KODWA, if you've been following this storyline, has basically become the backbone of this whole situation. She's the one who is there every single day. Not Thandika, not Zolani, not the extended family who only show up when there's a big decision to be made, KODWA. She's the one who noticed early that something was wrong with Zethu, long before anyone else was willing to admit it. And that's actually one of the most important threads in this episode. The writers are making a very deliberate point about who actually shows up for people in crisis versus who just talks about showing up. KODWA has watched Zethu struggle in real time, and in this episode, her patience finally starts to crack. There's a scene early on where KODWA is on the phone, and you can hear in her voice that she is exhausted. Not angry, exhausted, tired in that bone-deep way where you've been carrying something for so long that you've stopped expecting anyone to take it off your shoulders. And then Steve calls. Now, every time Steve calls in this show, something shifts, and this time is no different. The call seems to be the final push that leads to the decision that the baby needs to go, that custody can no longer stay in this limbo where Zethu is technically the mother but KODWA is doing all the actual mothering. This is where the episode gets its title moment. Zethu loses the baby again, not through some dramatic courtroom scene, but through something quieter and almost sadder, a family deciding, out of love and exhaustion, that the child is safer somewhere else. And what makes it worse is that Zethu isn't even fully present for the decision. She's off dealing with her own spiral, and by the time she surfaces, the decision has basically already been made around her. Now here's where I have to be honest with you, because a lot of viewers online are going to want to pick a side, and I don't think this episode is asking us to. Thandika has been offering to help Zethu with the baby for a while now, and on the surface, that looks generous. But there's a subtext running through the whole episode that Zethu feels like Thandika's help comes with strings, that it's less about supporting Zethu and more about proving a point to her, or maybe even about slowly positioning herself as the better mother figure. Whether that's fair to Thandika or not is honestly up for debate, and I think the show wants us debating it. What isn't up for debate is that Zethu is pushing away the one consistent form of help she's been offered, and that's heartbreaking to watch regardless of the politics behind it. There's also a really important through line about Zolani in this episode, even though he's barely on screen. His absence says almost as much as any dialogue could. He has emotionally checked out of this situation, and the episode doesn't really explain why in detail, but you get the sense that he's either overwhelmed, guilty, or simply doesn't know how to be present for a partner who is struggling with something he doesn't understand. And that's such a real thing, isn't it? So many people don't know how to show up for a partner going through postpartum depression, especially when that depression doesn't look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like anger, like distance, like pushing everyone away. Zethu isn't crying in every scene. She's sharp, she's defensive, and that makes it easy for people around her, including maybe some of us watching, to forget that this is still a mental health crisis and not just bad behavior. And that brings me to the part of the episode that I think is genuinely the most important, the conversation around the pills. This is handled carefully by the show, and I want to handle it carefully too. We don't get a clear answer on where the pills came from or who prescribed them, and the show deliberately keeps that murky. What we do know is that someone gave Zethu medication without full clarity on dosage or side effects, and that decision is now sitting heavily over the whole family. It's not framed as anyone trying to harm her, it's framed as people who are desperate to help a struggling new mother reaching for something, anything, without necessarily understanding what they're reaching for. That's a scary reality for a lot of families dealing with postpartum depression, and I think Inimba is using this storyline to say something bigger about how undersupported new mothers are, especially when the people around them don't have access to proper mental health resources. I do want to pause here and say, if this storyline is hitting close to home for anyone watching, postpartum depression is real, it's common, and it is treatable. If you or someone you know is struggling after having a baby, please reach out to a doctor or a mental health professional. Zethu's story is dramatic because it's television, but the underlying issue is something many new mothers actually go through, and it deserves to be taken seriously off-screen too. Okay, back to the episode. So once the decision is made that KODWA will formally take over care of the baby, there's this incredibly tense scene where Zethu realizes what's happening. And I have to give credit to the actress here, because the range in that scene is wild. She goes from defensive to devastated in about 30 seconds, and you can feel the whole room holding its breath. It's not a screaming match. It's quiet, which somehow makes it worse. KODWA isn't gloating. She's not trying to win. She looks like someone doing the hardest thing she's ever had to do, and Zethu looks like someone watching the last piece of control slip out of her hands. There's a line in that scene that I think is going to be quoted a lot this week. KODWA essentially tells Zethu that she's not taking the baby to punish her, she's taking the baby because someone has to be steady, and right now that someone can be Zethu. It's brutal, but it's also said with so much love that it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a sister trying to save both Zethu and the child at the same time, even if it means being the villain in Zethu's eyes for a while. Now let's shift gears, because while all of this is happening on one side of the story, Zulika and Lazarus are having their own crisis, and honestly, it might be even messier in its own way. Their relationship has always been shown as one of the more stable ones on this show, which is exactly why this episode hits different, because we're watching cracks appear in something we assumed was solid. The fight starts over something that seems almost small, Lazarus going to fetch Zulika from her ex-husband's house. On paper, that sounds like a caring gesture. Your wife is somewhere, you go pick her up. But the way it unfolds tells a very different story. Lazarus isn't just picking her up because he's being supportive, he's clearly bothered by where she was and who she was with, and instead of having an honest conversation about that discomfort, he lets it simmer until it turns into something bigger. By the time they are back home, what should have been a simple ride turns into a full confrontation, with Lazarus questioning her choices and Zulika feeling like she's being cross-examined for something she didn't think was a big deal in the first place. What I find really compelling about this scene is that neither of them is fully wrong. Lazarus has every right to feel some kind of way about his wife spending time at her ex-husband's home, especially if there's unresolved history there. But the way he handles it, going in seemingly to make peace and then pivoting into an argument, is where he loses the moral high ground a little. Zulika, on the other hand, isn't exactly making it easy either. She brushes off his concerns instead of sitting with them, which only escalates things further. It's one of those arguments where you can see both people trying to be heard and neither one actually listening, and if you've ever been in a relationship, you know exactly how quickly that spirals. The scene where Zulika tells Lazarus he needs to sleep in his own room is the moment where you really feel the temperature of this argument. It's such a small, domestic detail, a bedroom, but it carries so much weight. It's not really about where he sleeps. It's about the distance that suddenly opened up between two people who, just weeks ago, seemed like the strongest couple on the show. And Lazarus's reaction to that distance is interesting too, because instead of pushing back angrily, he goes quiet, almost withdrawn, like he's realizing in real time how serious this has become. Threaded through all of this is the subplot about Lazarus's position as CEO and what it might cost him. There's a real question hanging over this storyline about whether he's willing to step back from that position for the sake of his marriage, and the episode plants the idea that he might actually be leaning that way, not because Zolika is demanding it outright, but because he's starting to understand that his ambition has been quietly taking up space that should belong to his relationship. Whether the show actually follows through on that in the next few episodes remains to be seen, but it's a strong seed being planted here. And then there's the cultural layer running underneath the Zolika and Lazarus story, the discussion around the umbilical cord custom, the icicle, and what the family is owed or expected to do around it. This part of the episode leans heavily into tradition, into the idea that certain rituals around a child's cord need to be honored, and there's tension about whether that's even still possible, given that no one seems fully certain where the cord was buried in the first place. It's a small but very telling detail, because it mirrors the bigger theme of this whole episode. Things that were supposed to be handled with care and intention have instead been left vague, forgotten, or rushed, and now everyone is scrambling to make sense of the consequences. By the end of the episode, we're left with two households in crisis, but in very different ways. Zethu's home is quiet in the worst possible sense, the baby is gone, she is left with her own thoughts, and there's a real question of what she does next, whether she uses this moment to actually seek the help she's been avoiding, or whether she sinks further away from everyone who's tried to reach her. Meanwhile, Zolika and Lazarus's home is loud with unspoken tension, two people sleeping in separate rooms, both still clearly in love, but both also clearly unwilling to be the first to fully open up. What ties these two storylines together, if you ask me, is this idea of pride getting in the way of connection. Zethu's pride won't let her accept help from Thandika, even when she needs it. Lazarus's pride won't let him just say he was hurt and scared instead of turning it into an interrogation. Zolika's pride won't let her acknowledge that maybe her husband's concern came from a real place. Everyone in this episode is fighting a version of the same battle, wanting to be understood without having to be vulnerable, and that's honestly what makes Inimba such compelling television right now. So where does this leave us heading into next week? I think we're going to see Zethu hit a real turning point, one way or another. Either this loss becomes the wake-up call that finally gets her into proper care, or it pushes her somewhere darker, and I really hope the show handles that with the sensitivity it deserves. On the Zolika and Lazarus side, I expect we'll get at least one more blow-up before we get any kind of resolution, because right now they're both still too deep in their own hurt to meet each other halfway. What did you think of last night's episode? Do you think Thokozile made the right call taking the baby, or do you think Zethu deserved one more chance before things went this far? And on the Zolika and Lazarus front, is Lazarus overreacting, or is Zolika not taking his feelings seriously enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read every single one of them, and if you enjoyed this recap, make sure you like the video, subscribe for more Inimba reviews, and turn on notifications so you don't miss next week's breakdown. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.